Welcome to Junkyard Theory, everybody. Today's guest is a script supervisor who's racked up quite a number of credits, and I fell into, he fell into my orbit while I was watching a movie about aliens orbiting this particular town and terrorizing all its inhabitants except for this one girl. And if you've not been living under a rock, chances are that you come across this movie called No One Will Save You. It's amazing. And a page from the screenplay was thrown up on Reddit, which kind of made the waves online, kind of went viral. And I knew definitely needed to get somebody who had worked on this movie. So joining me today in the studio is David Bush. David, thank you so much for joining, man.
Gosh, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here and excited that you found that script page.
It was hard to miss. Because anybody knows, screenplays have these certain standards, and this particular page kind of broke everything. But before we come to No One Will Save You, I want to know a little bit about you. What's your origin story? Which planet do you hail from?
So I live in New Orleans currently and was born and raised in Louisiana, United States. And got into film very, very young. Went to film school, but before I was done, I just lucked into an internship on a movie in camera, actually. Then quickly kind of worked my way up as an assistant director. I wanted to write and direct. I was writing a lot of stuff on my own at the time. And as an assistant director, I wanted to hear more of what the directors were saying to the actors. I wanted to be more involved in the conversation about camera angles and coverage and editorial decisions. And so I kind of segued into script supervision, where I sit next to the director. I hear everything that's said over the context to the cast. And I'm just more integrally involved in those conversations. Then I've worked as a script supervisor since then, and that's coming close to a decade now, on all sorts of projects, varying in size, kind of progressively larger. And at the same time, have written and directed some of my own stuff on a smaller scale, TV movies, that kind of thing. Now I continue to do both. I continue to write and direct my own stuff, but also script supervise projects that I think will continue my education. To me, I think script supervising is one of the best ways to sit next to really talented people and watch how they work, and kind of expand beyond the horizons of how you creatively work. So to me, that was a huge draw with No One Will Save You. And I'm sure we'll talk about that screenplay. But like you said, it broke rules and it expanded the way I think about how to convey a movie on the page. So that to me was just an exciting opportunity to learn from some people with some very different creative outlooks than mine.
It's fantastic. You mentioned learning quite a few times. So being a script supervisor, for those who are watching the show who don't know, what's the job of a script supervisor, and why do you think that is such an important role to learn, writing and directing?
Absolutely. I would describe the script supervisor's job as to make sure that the editor has what they need in order to create the director's vision in the edit of the film, despite any obstacles that are encountered either on set or on the script page. So to that end, when I first come onto a project, I get the script and I review it for potential continuity errors, factual concerns, and I raise these questions for the director and producer. Often I'll point something out and I'll say it from the perspective not of, hey, this is wrong, but rather, is it okay that these things happen? Could there be confusion? And much of the time, the director will say, I'm fine with that. It doesn't distract from the story. Let's go with it anyway. But I'll just raise these concerns in pre-production. Once production is moving, I am on set. I am watching every take, every setup, and identifying any concerns about things that will restrict the editor's ability to cut the movie. Whether that's we're lacking angles that we need, whether that's actors are saying a dialogue in a way that doesn't match with the story at large or with other angles that we've gotten. Of course, everyone's familiar with the physical continuity, a cup teleporting back and forth between hands or a shirt changing mid-scene. I point those things out. And while that's going on, I take extensive notes for the editors so that they can look at, when they're looking at the footage, they've got a quick reference in the form of my notes to see why one take differs from another, or or how the director intends for any particular angle to be used. And that's more or less the job. So what that affords me is I'm looking at the script first, and then the coverage and the process of set at a very analytical level, which when I'm writing and when I'm directing, I think encourages me to have a vantage point that's less totally freeform and more focused on just the practicalities of will what we're shooting work? Will it work efficiently? Will it work smoothly? In addition to that, throughout this whole process, I'm sitting next to the director, often sitting next to the director of photography as well. I'm in close conversation with producers, so I'm seeing the way that they make their creative decisions, and I'm learning from it. And oftentimes, I've been very fortunate. I'm picking up what I think are good tips, but frequently it's seeing things that I don't think work efficiently or effectively, and making a mental note to when I'm working on a project, whether I'm writing or directing, to not make those mistakes or not make those choices necessarily. And finally, just hearing what directors say to actors is a huge thing because that's typically very private. It's often, in my mind, the best directors don't tend to yell their notes across set, but being in such proximity to hear the way in which directors give notes, and it varies massively from director to director and depending on the cast. But I think that's been a wonderfully educational experience.
That's a well-rounded idea. What your job entails, and pretty much like what you think. It's very educational, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. The best directors, they don't yell across the set at the actors because actors are very emotional people. And how do okay, you mentioned a cup exchanging hands, something as simple as that. Do you communicate that directly to the actor, or do you just tell the director or the AD? How does that communication process work up the hierarchy?
It varies from project to project, and that's one of the first conversations that I have with the director. Is some are very comfortable with anyone on the crew communicating any needs directly to cast, provided they're doing it professionally and respectfully. Other directors are very protective of the communication flow to cast. So I talked to a director very early on before we even start production about their preferences. Also during the course of a show, you kind of feel it out. And it varies by cast member too. Some actors only want to hear one voice telling them anything. Others are very open and they're very, comfortable in the collaborative process. Even beyond that, if I notice that the cup has changed in an actor's hand in a way that might inhibit the cut, and that's worth noting. Oftentimes, continuity errors don't matter. If we're doing medium shots on both actors and a cup is changing, but we're also doing close-ups that are above the level of the cut that are just on their face, then honestly, a cup changing hands in the edit probably doesn't matter. It could have just happened when we were on the other angle. And the last thing I want to do is get in an actor's head about where the cup is when what they probably should be thinking about or feeling is the emotion of the scene, or other just more pertinent factors of the scene. So once I've made the decision, once I've decided that I think the cup could matter, I typically, on most sets, will ask the director first. I'll say it from the perspective, so in that take, he's holding the cup in the right hand. It's been in his left before. Do you want me to say something? And then take the director's lead. Since I direct as well, I am very sensitive to the fact that as a director, you never want to feel like the people around you are stepping on your toes or overstepping or trying to direct the movie instead of you. So in my mind, the easiest way to circumvent that is just always put the decision on the director, or at least if the decision's not really obvious, and let them be the one that makes the call because they're going to be the one in the editing room and it's going to be their name on the poster ultimately.
That's very true. How many things do you actively look at on set? Because it's a very eagle-eyed task, and it's not the easiest because there's so many things happening on set. How do you, like you said, you keep notes, but is there anything else that you kind of use to aid yourself to kind of keep track of all these of continuity?
Yeah. So I think on each show, you pretty quickly learn, or at least the only way to do it, because you're right, it is a lot of things to focus on, um, is prioritizing. It's figuring out, in any given environment, what are the things that matter and what are the things that don't. So one of the parts of the job in terms of making sure actors are saying lines in a way that works is if an actor calls for line, I'm the person who, yells their line to them across set. I won't do it until they call for line. I don't like if they pause because they're, taking a moment or can't think of the line, I'll wait until they yell line. Then I should be ready to throw their line to them. That said, many actors, I worked with many, many actors who never have to call for a line. They are so on top of the script. They just don't need to ever. So with those actors, I kind of stopped worrying about tracking the dialogue because I know they've got it right. I'll prioritize my focus on physical continuity, where the cup is, or on other aspects of the shot. If we have a director or DP that's especially sensitive to the way the light is changing because it's cloudy out or whatever, I'll focus more on that. There's nothing worse. It's my worst nightmare when an actor who never calls for their line out of the blue calls for a line while I'm in the middle of making a note about what the background actors are doing. It's this absolute it's the worst feeling in the world, this panic of like, oh shit, where are we in the in the script, and digging for that. But yeah, aside from those nightmare situations, it's just about kind of picking the priorities of what matters. I guess I would equate it to if you're driving, if it's foggy out or if it's raining out, you're focused on different things than if it's clear weather and you're in traffic, So it's kind of just picking the things that demand attention in any given situation and prioritizing those.
So it's a very highly subjective thing that changes from shoot to shoot. Like you can't have a one template fits all. So I'm going to prioritize 1, 2, 3, 4 for this one. I can't prioritize the same list for another project. Can I?
Yeah, from shoot to shoot, and even from actor to actor. Some actors also will come to you after a shot and they want to know, hey, did I do this or was this different? And for those actors, I need to be more on top of knowing the answer to that question. And it's something that as each show moves on, as as you get days and days and weeks into a project, you just sort of learn how best to fill the demands of the cast and the crew.
Do you ever have any trouble switching over from one production to the other? Because you get used to one way of doing things. Like by the end of it, okay, by the end, that's like say 30 days or whatever. You grown accustomed to one way of working, and then immediately you gotta switch. Does that ever bother you?
Um, it, there are definitely times where it's a bit of a culture shock. I've worked with directors who want to be able to ask, you know, in take 3 or on take 7, and they want to ask in take 3 what happened. And I've worked with directors who just utterly don't care. And that's not to say that either approach is better or worse. By the same token, the degree of my involvement in conversations about coverage and conversations about just what angles we'll use for any given scene varies massively from show to show. So on some movies, I am a very functional part of deciding what the angles will be. I have worked with directors who bring the actors in, they rehearse the scene, they let the actors basically do what they want, and then they turn to the first assistant director, the director of photography, and myself and say, okay, let me know when you know how we're going to shoot it. And the director walks away and has no say at all in that. I mean, of course, they'll comment on what we've chosen. On other shows, the director and the director of photography have meticulously storyboarded long before I was ever on production, and literally I have no voice and no need to have a voice in the conversation of what the shots will be. Sometimes that is that one can be a bit of a hiccup for me, um, especially if I'm not as fully aware of the plan. So like there is a plan in place. I just don't know what every step of it will be. It makes it tricky for me to then, assess whether any given step has served its purpose. That said, I have known other script supervisors, uh, and working as an assistant director before I script supervised, I got to watch a lot of script supervisors work, many of whom were phenomenal, and I learned a lot from in a positive direction. And same with watching other directors, I've seen script supervisors do a lot of things that I made a note to avoid. And one of the biggest ones is just getting upset or taking it personally or being put off if the role you want to have isn't exactly that role on any given movie. I've seen script supervisors, say, "Hey, she said the line this way, that doesn't work," and then get really insulted when a director tells them, "Yeah, that doesn't matter. I'm okay with it." Uh, they feel like they're being, dismissed, and I've very much made it a point to never be bothered by a director making decisions that to me feel contradictory. Because again, at the end of the day, nobody is going to blame me for the movie. I mean, people in the film industry in the know might wonder, but at the end of the day, the director is going to be the one with their name popping up in the trade magazines, being criticized. So if they want to make that choice, rock on. I hope it works.
And just like, the same way, the other ones that get the credit too.
Yeah, exactly. Often there are things that I've seen on set that I think won't cut together. I've seen takes that in my head I think, man, they're gonna have a really rough time in the editing room. And then I see the movie and the scene looks great and it works because of, just performance they got or some clever way that they cut it. So I'm excited when I have low expectations and then it completely worked. And that's why, a good director, you got to trust them.
I've never worked with a script supervisor before, so the way that I plan things is that I am very meticulous with my storyboarding and shot listing. So I see the edit in my head long before I'm on set. So for me, like in a way, sometimes I feel like I'm probably also doing the script supervision on set, keeping an eye out for continuity errors and performance, all of that. But delegating this task entirely to somebody, I feel like, from what you're telling me, it's very it's relieving in a certain way to not have to worry too much about, like how is this going to cut through in the edit. So how early on do you join pre-production or development? At what stage do you hop on?
Yeah, I typically come on to production about a week or two before production starts. So
That's not too long.
no, it's not. I will often get a script, a month or two before,
Hmm.
just to look at and give notes. But that's for one day, and then I'm off again until a week, maybe 2 weeks before production. I am almost never involved in any sort of storyboarding process in advance. That said, on productions that are meticulous, on productions where they have storyboarded or thoroughly shot listed, I will ask for that material early on, just so that I'm on the same page, and just so that I can, be aware of or point out any potential hangups or problems on set. But I'm rarely involved until fairly soon before production kicks off.
That's interesting. And how often do you have any conversations with the editor, if at all?
Often actually. Usually, in my ideal world, on probably most, especially bigger shows, I'll often have a meeting with the editor and their team shortly before the movie starts, just so that I can ask them, hey, is there anything in particular that you like to see in these notes? Is there anything, if they've worked with the director before, I'll ask them for their thoughts on, what things that they've missed, what things that have been issues in the past. And then throughout production, I'll often field questions from the editor. They'll reach out to ask about, is there still a plan to get this shot? Sometimes they'll go through me to tell the director, basically, they want to tell the director, hey, I think we need an insert on the coffee cup.
This is during production itself.
Yeah, literally during production, when the director, usually the editor's not there on set. The director doesn't often have time to go physically sit down with the editor at night, shooting long days. They'll often reach out to ask if there's an intent of getting. It's usually inserts or pickup shots or establishing shots. Uh, and I can then take that to the director, and again, not phrasing it as, "Hey, you need this," phrasing it as, the editor is asking if this is something you want to get. Um, I'll have those conversations often. Same thing. I'll have conversations sometimes about changes that are made on the day. I make these notes, but then often it's easier to just talk it through and explain. Here is why this scene differs from what's in the script. Here's how things later are going to change to reflect it, so that they can have the most information as they start to do an assembly. That said, once production's done, I don't. Once we're done shooting on the last day, I usually don't hear from the editor ever. I mean, at least not professionally. I don't think I've ever gotten a call from an editor in post production with questions. If I did, I think I would panic. I would be very worried that something had gone really wrong.
That makes sense. With everything that you're saying, David, this particular role of the script support, it kind of feels like a little nexus point in between, the various stages of production, pre-production, production, and post. Kind of like there's one point where you are what you're doing is a derivative of pre-production, very important to what's happening on set, which will eventually influence how the film is constructed in post. So it's not something that gets talked about very often. What are the nitty gritties that people, that I don't know. I'm going to be honest. I don't know as much about your job as you do. I definitely don't know about your job as much as you do. What does not get spoken about at all? What would you like more people to know about when it
Yeah,
comes to
I think to what you said about it being a nexus point, one way that I've described script supervising is you're protecting the edit against the realities of production. So in pre-production, everyone is very optimistic. Everyone thinks everything's going to go perfectly, and they've got these wonderful plans that often don't hold up because weather happens or because
Murphy's
cast.
Law happens?
Exactly. All these things, go amiss. But at the end of the day, in you post is often kind of triage. It's kind of figuring out how to fix problems. And what I would describe script supervising as, a lot of it, is being a safety net during production to ensure that to try and minimize the damage of all those obstacles that happen, and make sure that in post they have the most tools, the most raw material, or the most useful raw material to cut together something close to the ideal that they had during pre-production. And then in terms of things that I think people don't realize, is people who are familiar with script supervising, people outside the industry, the context in which they hear of it is almost always the like Game of Thrones coffee cup appears in a shot. And I guess my defense of errors like that is, when you're watching a movie, you don't know the circumstances that led to whatever the mistake or the error or the thing is. I've worked on movies where there's reshoots 6 months later that I am not there for, and that many of the other original crew aren't there for. They do a reshoot in a different city or different state. Um, and so it's impossible to know watching a scene, when there's a shot that feels weird or a cut that doesn't quite fit. You never know how or why that error actually happened. And by the same token, I've seen movies and I've worked on movies where there's mid scene there, it feels like there's like a jarring moment, or like there's a cut to another actor that doesn't feel like it fits. And what it is the movie ran too long and they cut out 3 minutes in the middle of a scene. So now there is a weird jump because people are teleporting across the room, and it's actually much more severe than it feels or looks like. But the reason for that isn't that the actors didn't make a mistake. On set, no one made a mistake. Everyone did things right. But then in the edit, that scene felt too long, and the director and editor made the decision that a kind of jarring cut was less distracting than 2 minutes that slowed down the pace of the story. So I think that's a thing to bear in mind, is when there appear to be errors, they might not be mistakes at all. They might just be, decisions made later on in the process that then required some degree of sacrifice.
There's always compromises that had to be made, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. A mentor of mine once called filmmaking the ultimate collaborative art form, where
Yeah.
people from all disciplines of art come together and they work towards this one singular goal. And in pursuit of that goal, obviously, there's a few things that you probably had to compromise on. Maybe performance over continuity or what have you. What are the most frustrating things about your job? Because it's like you said, it's very easy for people to just call out the instances like the Starbucks coffee cup on Game of Thrones or something like that. Anything at all, but only the people who make movies understand how much time, money, effort, and your literal sweat, blood, and tears you pour into this piece of art. What are the biggest frustrations that job, your job in particular entails?
Yeah, I agree with you completely about this. So much sacrifice throughout the day, and I tell people often that, like, to me, one of the hardest parts of directing is making small sacrifices in the morning that protect you against having to make big sacrifices in the afternoon or at the end of the day. There's a
Elaborate on that. Elaborate on that, please.
Yeah, there's a joke about a lot of film sets shoot Gone with the Wind in the morning and then Dukes of Hazzard in the evening. And it's true in that what you often see, particularly amongst relatively inexperienced directors, is you see people doing 10 takes of a simple shot in the morning because it has to be exactly right, it has to be perfect. And then around lunchtime, they realize that they're horribly behind schedule. And so towards the end of the day, you're only doing one take on things, even big emotional scenes where the actors could benefit from doing multiple takes. You're rushing through them. They have a shot list, and in the morning they're adding shots to those scenes. And then at the end of the day, they're cutting shots that they thought were important, but now they just don't have time to get because the sun is going down. And so to that end, what I as a director have to do, and what I as a script supervisor, kind of help advise and encourage directors to do, is to remember that the pace at the end of the day matters just as much as at the beginning. And so being too precious or being too, meticulous early in the day can force you to then make huge sacrifices later in the day. So it's just a matter of, there's so many small pieces that go into assembling a movie, and it's easy to forget when there's not time pressure that all of those pieces matter theoretically roughly equally. So that's a constant thing. So as a script supervisor, a frustration of mine, and again, I by all means defer to the director on any project where I'm script supervising. It is their choice if they want to make the insert on the plate or whatever look perfect, and we're going to spend 2 hours on it in the morning. But I feel it when I'm watching us fall farther and farther behind, focusing on a shot that I suspect won't even be in the edit or will very briefly be there, and knowing that at the end of the day we're going to be in a mad sprint to try and tackle some big complicated scene, or we're going to have to really massively simplify a scene to accommodate that time lost. And again, I wouldn't, in that position, the script supervising, it is not my place to say that. It's maybe the assistant director's place to kind of point out. All I can do is kind of guide that, is remind the director, or remind the director of photography of the relative significance of any given shot in the edit. So where you see it most chronically and again, especially with relatively new directors, is often when you're shooting a scene, you shoot the master first, big wide shot that runs start to finish. Uh, but in almost every scene you see in a movie, that shot is rarely used. You often, in an edit, you'll start on that wide and then you go in tight and the whole rest of the scene plays in close angles. Maybe you jump back to the wide for the final shot of the scene. That's just kind of the stereotypical way to edit. But what new directors will often do is you do that master and they want it to be absolutely perfect from start to finish, which unless you're shooting a scene that's going to play as a oneer, there's no reason that shot, every aspect of it needs to work. It's fine. If an actor misses a line in the middle of it, doesn't matter. You're never going to be on the wide shot for the close up of someone saying, I love you. You're not going to be there. Or if you had part of it in take one and part of it in take three, well, you're going to cut away to other things. So watching a director get hung up on that and kind of losing track of the whole puzzle because of one piece is definitely a little frustrating.
Probably more than a little times. I wanna bring attention to nuances.
Sure.
Talk to me about this movie. I mean, there's a lot of CGI, and working with I don't know, with characters that have interact with CGI and trying to maintain strict continuity. How does that work? Because you don't see aliens on set. What do you do to ensure things?
So there were a couple approaches. One, that was a movie where our writer-director, Brian Duffield, and our director of photography, Aaron Morton, meticulously planned out almost every shot. And which isn't to say there weren't new ideas had on set and new angles discovered, but particularly the scenes that had VFX involved, that involved the aliens. Brian had a very strong visual sense of exactly what that was going to be. And then, the lead in the movie, Caitlin Dever, and Brian talked a lot about, exactly where the alien would be, exactly what she would be seeing. Our VFX team was on set, and we had a special effects team on set. And often there was some kind of proxy just to give her an eye line, which incidentally, that's, as script supervisor, often to ensure that shots will cut together. A big part of that is talking about eye line, which is the direction that an actor's eyes are pointed in when they're looking at something off camera. And for scenes that have extensive VFX, that's incredibly important because, again, they often don't have a real thing to look at. So for me, there was a fair amount of just communicating with Caitlin when there wasn't, a physical representation of the alien there, to let her know, exactly where the thing was, or just to make sure that the way we were shooting her and the way that Brian and Aaron had directed her to look would cut with whatever our VFX shots were going to be. So yeah, we had relatively little visual reference for the exact look of the aliens on set, but at the same time, Brian and Aaron and our VFX team were very constantly communicative with her about what that look would be. And for that matter, in the script, the way it is on screen is, I would say, 95% an accurate reflection of what's on the page. And that's a testament to the fact that Brian both wrote and directed the movie and had a very clear vision, from the onset.
It's one of my favorite horror thriller movies of this year because I love gray aliens and how the entire thing was approached. It was just, I thought it was phenomenal. And for a movie that had like what, two or three lines, two lines of dialogue entirely.
Yeah.
That was so much that was. Yeah, sorry.
No. And the VFX thing too. What's exciting for me is because I'm not involved in post. So as script supervisor, when a movie wraps, I usually have one day after wrap during which I just compile everything into one big report and turn it in. And I'm rarely, occasionally I'll see an early cut or something, but I have almost no involvement once we, call wrap on the last day. So on a movie that's as VFX heavy as No One Will Save You, it's very exciting for me when I finally see it. just to see, because it's a, from my perspective, my fingers are crossed. I really hope that it's going to come out looking the way it's been in Brian's mind and in my mind. But unlike Brian and unlike the rest of the post team and the producers, I don't see it. I don't see that process happen. So it's exciting when I finally see the movie, and a huge credit to him and to the post team on that. They did a phenomenal job of really grounding and integrating all of those VFX elements. And like you said, especially in a script that is with no dialogue, with virtually no discussion, those factors are so important, and it's awesome to see that what we did on set worked so well with that process. Because like you said, it's one of my favorite movies of the year, and it was such a cool. Relief's not the right word, but like to see it and see that it came together that well.
Undoubtedly, this the screenplay, the page that made those all around, was the entire screenplay like that, or was it just that one page?
So I guess, which page did you see?
This is I didn't know there was more than one circulating, but the one that I saw is when she's up on the ceiling and the guy comes and
Yeah.
that.
No, the entire screenplay is not like that.
Okay.
And I don't think I'm giving away anything by this.
You had my hopes up there for a minute, man.
No. Honestly, if the whole screenplay was like that, and I encourage anyone to look up that page. It's a giant just block of letters and words. It would be so hard to read a whole screenplay written like that. But the whole screenplay is unusual. And if anyone can look up, Brian Duffield is the writer director. He's got a lot of credits now. He wrote Jane Got a Gun, I think was his big break. He wrote one of the Divergent movies. More recently, he wrote Love and Monsters. He wrote Underwater. He's got a couple other unproduced scripts that are all findable online. You just Google search Brian Duffield PDF. His typical writing style, he does usually have dialogue, and he's a very, very clever dialogue writer. But what I think is very distinctive about his writing style is we're all used to seeing screenplays where you've got, kind of short paragraphs of action, where an action line will, run 2 or 3 lines, sometimes 4. If it's longer than that, it becomes kind of clunky. In Brian's scripts, at least in the ones I've read, and I've read several of them, most of his action lines are just a few words. So if you look at a page in a Brian Duffield script, you never have lines that reach all the way from left to right and then go again. It's just little like, snippets down the left-hand side of the page, which in No One Will Save You is even more pronounced because there's no dialogue. So when I got the script for No One Will Save You, and I was at a point, I think I just finished cutting a movie that I directed, and I didn't particularly want to script supervise anything right away. But a producer I'd worked with before reached out and said, "Hey, I think you should have a look at this. It's a really interesting project." And I opened this script, and page 1 is literally, it's 20 or 30 just little word snippets down the left side of the page. The result is, for most screenplays, a screenplay usually translates to 1 page per minute of screen time is typically the correlation. And usually, if you're a person who reads at a normal speed, that's about how fast you'll read it too. So, No One Will Save You was probably a 90, 95 page script. So typically I would get that document and I would think, okay, this is going to take me an hour and a half to read. From the time I opened No One Will Save You to the time I finished reading it was probably 40 minutes. And it's an hour and a half long movie, and the movie fairly accurately reflects what's on the page. But that writing style reads so fast. And as a writer, I would say I think Brian Duffield is, since Shane Black, the most transformative writer for how to write on the page. Because when you think about it, very few people enjoy reading a script. I mean, we enjoy it because we're excited about what it could become, but the actual act of reading a script is often kind of tedious. And the genius of finding a way to make it fly by is palpable and is incredibly important. And it's been done a little bit before. Like David Koepp, who wrote Jurassic Park, you can see it in his action scenes. His action scenes will be like ripples in the water. You know, I'm doing this badly. It becomes like bad slam poetry. But it's the way Brian writes is so unusual and incredibly effective, and that is what most of that script is like. So then, when you get to a page like the one that has apparently circulated, it's such an astonishing change of pace. Which in the movie, that moment is as well. Everything is very different from what it has been before, and he's done similar things in other scripts. I think the script for The Babysitter is out there, which is also Brian, and he plays with format on the page in a way that I think is very interesting and very compelling. Uh, and when done selectively, very effective. I would caution anyone writing a script that they hope to sell against going too wild, um, because you run, if it's not done very, very confidently and very deliberately, it runs the risk of just looking like you don't know what you're doing. With Brian, that is utterly not an issue. He clearly has a great grasp of the page.
That's true. That's true. But that kind of goes to show you like how malleable screenplay, the art of screenwriting can also be if you have a real grasp of the page, like you said. So
I
it's fantastic. It's
Yeah,
fantastic.
I completely agree. And I think it's a tricky line to walk because
It
you
is.
the quote unquote rules are there for a reason. There's a reason that slug lines are formatted the way they are. There's a reason that the dialogue is separated out the way it is. And I read a tremendous number of scripts, and you often know on page one that the person who wrote it doesn't understand film production. Um, and that's very off-putting. And even if your story is amazing, if on page one it just doesn't feel professional, it's a huge red flag. I think a lot of people put a script down fairly early and they don't get far. It's the same thing with rampant typos. Like I don't think there's a single typo in Brian's script. He formats in a very unusual way sometimes, but you can tell that this isn't. It's not sloppiness, and it's not a lack of awareness of the process. It's a deliberate choice. So to that end, for especially like young, and I mean young career wise, not necessarily young in age, writers, it's I think Brian's a perfect example of why it's incredibly important to know the standard, to really understand how screenplays usually look, and the best way to do that is just read a lot of them. So
Yeah.
many are available online. But then, if your story can be serviced by changing the way those words are on the page, or if there's a way to make the reader or producers enjoy it more or be more excited about it, uh, then I personally am a big advocate of yeah, go for it. I read a script and they've tried something new, and I love in my screenplays uh, doing things that are unusual just to convey what makes this movie or this style different.
I think it's gotta be more of a not only a stylistic choice, but the style kind of has to reflect and further the story as well on the page. That I think probably is like the fine line that you're talking about, right?
Yes, I completely agree. I mean, and I mentioned Shane Black earlier. For
Yes.
anyone not aware of him, yeah, he wrote Lethal Weapon was his huge break, and then since then he's done Kiss Kiss Bang Bang,
Predator.
and he did Iron Man 3, I think, Predators.
Predator was his as well, right?
Yeah, Predators.
Predator, yeah.
Yeah, one of them, the fairly recent one. Uh,
Yeah.
but what Shane Black did that wasn't common is he would have these comments on the page that were just directed at the reader that you would never see on screen. These kind of snarky jokes. He would say, like the gun goes off and it's loud. I mean, really loud. No, seriously, it's that loud. Which is like it's you could just say it's incredibly loud, but he does these kind of snarky things, and with his movies it works well. If he was writing a really serious drama, if he was writing Braveheart or something, that would never work.
Mhm.
It would be so distracting. But the tone of his movies is snarky. His movies have a very like tongue-in-cheek, kind of playful sort of vibe. It's a little irreverent. And so when he does that on the page, it's not some, there's this kind of axiom of screenwriting that you only write down things you can see on screen. And that's generally true. You don't want to write down like she looks out the window and recalls the smell of her mother's like muffins or whatever, because there's no way to convey that. It's kind of cheating on the page. But what Shane Black is doing is, yeah, you can't see, no, really, it's that loud. But what he's conveying is a tone. He's conveying the way actors can play this and the way it can be shot should be fun and should be kind of, snarky and quippy. And that works. And the same thing with Brian's approach is he's, he's writing in images. His movies are very, very visual. And it just conveys a pacing that I think works. So to what you said, I completely agree. Kind of violating the alleged rules works if it makes your story better than it would have been. It makes it come across more accurately than it would have had you strictly written, he fires the gun, it's loud.
Yeah. Come to think of it, it's also probably very genre specific.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the same
Yeah.
tonally. Doing the Shane Black thing in in a really serious dark drama would
Yeah.
be offensive. Honestly, it could risk being really obnoxious. And the same thing, Brian's style, or at least the style of the scripts he's read, and the scripts I've read of his, which are mostly action. They're mostly in the sci-fi action space. Um, I don't know that style would work well if he was writing, Nomadland or something that was a really just, brooding, introspective thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, by the same token, Aaron Sorkin, if you read his scripts, he uses almost no action. Like, and Sorkin's style, which is very staccato, fast-paced dialogue. Often, it's kind of a red flag when you open a script and it's just a column of action right down the center of the page. It's usually a bit of a red flag that this writer doesn't think visually. But in Aaron Sorkin's case, he's so dialogue dependent that style works perfectly. And if you read Steve Jobs, you'll go through pages and pages without an action
Yeah.
line. For his genre, it works really well. But that wouldn't work at all for a Steve McQueen movie.
Exactly. I want to talk a little bit more, a little bit about your career besides script supervision. You're also a writer director. Talk
Yeah.
to me about that, because that's who you set out to be. And you do that too. I've seen on your credits list that you've been writing and directing your own movies as well. So learning from other people and then adapting their techniques. You see their mistakes, you try to navigate around those and do something as David Bush as you can. What
Yeah.
has that process been like?
It varies massively, which is great. So
Mm.
I've been writing screenplays since I was, a kid, since I was in high school. And throughout college, and once I was working in the industry as an assistant director and then as a script supervisor, I was still writing scripts of my own, and some of which were too original. They were, so out there that they wouldn't function. I mean, original in this case in a bad way. Like they would not be um, and I was working on these projects, and I was seeing a lot of scripts, some of which I thought were very good, some of which I thought were really not good. However, something in them had allowed producers to invest money in them. Something in them had gotten them off the ground. Um, so incorporating those practicalities, incorporating things on set that allow a script to be easier to shoot, made my things easier to market, easier to make. The very first writing jobs I got, the first paid writing jobs I got, were because I was working on set as a script supervisor, and I think it was a movie where it was a massive rain issue. We were getting rained out, and we needed to consolidate. And I again very diplomatically asked, hey, would it work if we made this change? And whatever I asked about worked. And then the producers and director ended up turning to me more often, like, well, how can we get from here to here when we don't have this set piece that we needed, and I was just throwing out ideas. Um, at that time, I already had, a whole bunch of screenplays that I'd finished. So I had a portfolio that I could show people. The producers of that project uh, basically had me doing uncredited rewrites on that movie, and I ended up doing that on a few more movies. And then at some point, it became an official thing where a couple different producers reached out and said, "Hey, uh, we've got this project. We're not happy with where the script is. Can you do a rewrite of it?" And so I did some commission work. I did a couple of faith-based movies in this capacity. And then I started doing that with Lifetime movies for the Lifetime channel. And meanwhile, again, I was still writing my own stuff and I was still showing my own projects to people. Worth noting, on a set where I'm script supervising, though that is where I've made most of my connections, I don't talk about my own writing or my own directing basically ever, because that's not my place on that show. And there is this thing where people show up on a set, whether they're starting out as a production assistant, where you can tell that they don't want to be in that job and they don't like it. And they're just there because they feel like they have to be to get to directing. And those tend to be the people that never move up. My approach is whatever job I'm doing there is my only job while I'm there, and I'm going to do the best I can at it. The extent to which I talk about my work is often it's if I'm asked, if a producer asks me like, have you thought about writing, or do you do anything else? Then I'll tell them. But even then, it's done very uh, quietly in a way that's not going to step on the project we're currently on. But anyway, so being on set in that capacity and doing some uncredited rewrite work led to actual rewrites, which then led to some just commissioned work, and then some scripts of mine being, optioned and made independently. So where I'm at now is I've written and directed several movies that fall in like the $1 million range. I've written a couple for other people that are a bit bigger than that. I have a few that are hopefully coming out within the next year or so. And I continue to write my own stuff. I continue to write commissioned work for other people. And again, I feel like both of those jobs, writing, directing, and then script supervising, inform each other in a way that I hope makes me better at both of them than I would otherwise have been.
Yeah, and something that you said really struck me about not talking about where you want to get to when you're working on a project. As much as you probably want to, because that's what most people do. It requires a tremendous amount of discipline to just keep it hush and put your head down and work, do what you have to do the best way you can. At the same time, working religiously on what you want to do. It's not easy, right? Nothing about filmmaking comes easy. It's a lot of resilience. But if you have patience, I guess it's you get to where you want to go to. Something gives in.
I completely agree with that. And people ask like what's the if I want to be a director, or I want to be a writer, or an actor, what's the best way to do it? And to my mind, there's two options. You can either start out on big projects in the lowest possible position. You can work on whatever, and this again, I say this as if that in itself is easy. But if you're in a place where movies are shooting, and reach out, get an internship if you can, or a PA position, or work as a background actor on bigger movies. That's how you start on unless you won the lottery and your parents are famous, which I didn't. I wish. That's how you start. You start at the bottom of the ladder on big projects, and you slowly work your way up. If you want to be a director of photography, you start as an intern or a PA. You become a camera utility, then an assistant camera, eventually an operator, and then maybe you're director of photography. Or the other avenue is you start at the top. You start out as a writer, director, lead actor, making very, very, very small projects. That's making videos on your iPhone that you put on YouTube, and then they get noticed, and you develop a following. Or make short films that you put into festivals that get some attention, get some accolades. And you make a small short film, and then a bigger short film, and then you make a small feature. And if you're lucky, it does well and it connects, and you make a bigger feature. So you either start in a big position on tiny projects and then make bigger and bigger projects, or you start in a tiny position on big projects and work your way up the ladder. And to me, the approach I've taken is to do both at the same time. I think that's the most practical. If you can find work on productions, do your best and just impress people. Just do the best job you can at whatever you're doing, and opportunities will open up. Meanwhile, you're doing your own thing so that when those opportunities do open up, you've got a portfolio or you've got a project to show for it. Um, three three projects that I directed that are all in late post production now literally came about because a friend of mine who I'd met on set, he was doing locations and I was an AD at the time, a decade ago, reached out a few years back and said, "Hey, it's the pandemic, everything's slow. Do you have any scripts that could be shot for under $500,000?" And I said, "Yeah, I have 9." And I sent him 9 log lines for scripts that had just been sitting on my shelf. I'd written them years before. He came back, he picked some ones he wanted to read. And then because of the pandemic, we ended up doing 3 of them instead of 1 of them, just kind of back to back to back.
Wow.
Having the connection of this guy, it was only because I worked on set and, did a good job at my job and he was good at his. And we met. Uh, Between that 10 years ago and him asking for these scripts, we didn't talk much. We weren't friends. We weren't, hanging out a lot, but we'd met and made a good impression. That part is because I started at the bottom and was kind of working my way up. But then if he'd called me and said, "Hey, do you have any scripts that could be done for this?" And I didn't, well, then that's meaningless. So I think it's a matter of, getting yourself in a position, again, working on set, plus developing your craft and having something to show so that when the opportunity happens, you're ready to jump on it.
I really love how you deconstructed the two pathways because that is so true. If you live in an area where you can actually go out and get work on bigger projects on the lower rung of the ladder, work your way up, or else do your own thing, start at the top on smaller projects. It's amazing, and also what you just did, I think, was that's luck, right? Opportunity needs preparation. You prepare.
Yeah.
You're preparing yourself all the time. So when the right opportunity came, it just connected. So I think,
Yeah.
plus being nice to people, being a good person on set. That's why it, eventually remember you and reach out after all those years. So it's something that I've noticed in almost all guests that I've had on board the show, that there are these recurring ethics that people follow within the industry, which is why they're successful, which is why they are who they are.
It took me a bit to learn that. When I first started
Mm.
out, when I was first ADing, my mentality was, it wasn't combative, but I thought like I need to prove myself. I need to just do the best at my job. And as an AD, it was like yelling at people and just being kind of rude. And I was good at my job. I was, getting the information across, but not in a way that was likable. And that's bad practice. Like, I mean, again, you want to be great at your job. However, you're right that people liking you goes such a long way. And to that end, there's the concept of like a rising tide floats all boats. That, the best way to endear people to you is to help them, is to just be helpful whenever you can. Um, this ties back to script supervising. So much of the job is telling people that they've made a mistake. So much of the job is telling actors, "You said the line this way, it's actually this," or telling costumes like, "Hey, he's supposed to be in the red shirt, he's in the blue shirt." Telling the director of photography, "We're jumping the eye line, the screen direction is going to be the opposite." And nobody likes to be told they're wrong. So if you can do it in a diplomatic way that lets people save face, if you can, my biggest tip to script supervisors is, instead of saying something's wrong, ask a question. Ask, "Is it okay that he's in a red shirt now?" And then let the costumer go, "No, he should be in a blue shirt." Now they're the one that got it right. You just asked. And the same thing with, the actor or the director. You say, "Is it okay that he said this, but it's scripted as this?" That way they can be the one who saves the day by saying, "No, it's not okay." As opposed to saying, "Hey, you did this wrong," which is just offensive. It's, I think that mentality of like, how can I help other people do their job well? How can I make them look good doing it? Then it encourages them to do the same back, and it endears you and makes them want to work with you again, which is so important in an industry where you're constantly going from job to job.
If there's a key takeaway from a conversation, I feel like it's the fact that this is a masterclass on how people liked.
I wish I'd figured some of this out way, way, way sooner. Man.
Well, this has been such a fantastic conversation, David. Seriously, thank you so much for sharing all that you did, because I'm leaving this conversation with my knowledge expanded, and certainly I hope this was worth your time. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for reaching out, and yeah, thank you for the way you're approaching looking into all these different aspects of film and putting it together. That's I really appreciate it.
100%. Till next time, this is John Theater, folks.